Deep within Terraria's cavernous underground resides a hollowed-out strata of vibrant marble, mined away long ago as an opulent building material for a society at its peak, unknowing of the terrible fate that would in time befall them. The price paid for such luxury is a high one though, with the lives of innumerous faceless workers of the lower classes tossed aside for the desires of an affluent few. Still, some remain below the surface, alive but changed, awaiting the day when they would return to extract vengeance upon their one-time masters. Gods had begun. Humanity had all players deep and challenging, different is less likely to get me horribly Far back in Terraria's turbulent past, before the civil war that would leave them an isolated shadow of their former selves, the lizards built great and wondrous cities across the surface world that gleamed in the light of the sun. While some buildings were constructed from more regular materials, the more spectacular ones were crafted from shining, polished marble, a testament to the advanced and perceived superiority of lizard culture. Such exquisite architecture was afforded only by extensive mining operations that reached deep into Terraria's bowels, seeking out and extracting the valuable materials however it was possible. It is no surprise that the rock face at which the lizard workers toiled was a far cry from the wondrous urban vistas above, but the true extent of the disparity between the two would have been enough to appall and sicken anyone unfortunate enough to learn of it. For that very reason, details of exactly how the marble had been extracted was kept strictly out of the public eye, with the ruling class preferring to perpetuate the belief that how it was sourced was not so important as how it was used, and so the injustice went on, the poorest members of society having no choice but to join the mining guilds if they had any hope of affording their next meal. Unbeknown to them though, as soon as they descended into the depths, the likelihood of them ever emerging again was almost non-existent. They would be led to the marble seam, where demand for the luxury resource forced workers to spend whole days and nights chipping away at the rock. If they were lucky, they may manage to sleep for a few hours at a time, but more often than not, the workers simply collapsed from exhaustion, a pickaxe still in their hand. For the longest time it had been suspected that the widespread poverty among the lower class was by design, that the ruling elite artificially tampered with wages and taxes, so that when there was a shortage of workers, a recession suddenly occurred that left the poorest members of society no choice but to join the miners. Despite the attempts at censorship, the conditions in the mines had become a thing of rumour among the labourers, a sort of horror story that kept the workforce in line to an extent. Even these nightmare tales did not accurately portray the real state of things below their very feet, however, for something much, much worse was going on, something not even the ruling class were fully aware of. For years the miners had struggled to cut away at the solid marble, their tools inadequate to mine sandstone, let alone anything else, and their superiors unwilling to go to the expense of providing anything better. Other techniques were explored in an effort to make the process more efficient. First it was explosives, but the resultant products were deemed to be too damaged for construction purposes. Little did it seem to matter that the detonations were carried out with no forewarning, leading to dozens of immediate deaths, only to be followed by hundreds more when the blasts inevitably caused widespread cave-ins. Automation was considered for a time, much to the surprise and relief of many a worker, but it was soon classified as an equally frivolous use of funds as it was to upgrade the mining tools, and so the backbreaking task of chipping massive slabs from the living earth and hauling them to the surface remained a job carried out by hand. The final idea was the strategic use of chemicals to weaken the marble in certain places, so that usable chunks practically fell away from the rock face. Concerns had been raised about the susceptibility of the marble to acids and the risks of impairing the integrity of entire seams, but a concoction was developed that was assured to do exactly what was needed without damaging the product. This, it seemed, was the perfect answer. After limited testing, it was found that the unique blend of chemicals performed as promised, and more importantly, were cheap, so were rushed into use in the mines. For a while it seemed that a permanent solution had been found. Productivity was up, and even the miners were pleased, as this new substance substantially reduced their workload. Conditions would quickly take a turn for the worse though, as the chemical mixture had never been tested for its impact on living creatures. Yet another oversight in the name of cost savings. Gradually, workers using the substance at the rock face began to fall ill, their skin growing almost stone-like, and within days they were met with death as they were suffocated by the carapace growing across them. Obviously some sort of reaction had occurred between the chemicals and the marble, the deadly vapour it produced then breathed in by the miners. But strangely enough, it was only the male workers survivors who were meeting this particular fate, as the women among them began to undergo a form of mutation. In the early stages, the coloration of their skin would fade, and their tails would begin to atrophy. Next, their cranial ridges began to elongate, becoming a mass of fleshy tentacles, until the point where their tails had completely withered and would be shed away. The last apparent stage of the metamorphosis was when the tentacles went on to develop mouths of their own, taking on the appearance of a writhing nest of snakes. Fearing the spread of the abominable creatures, anyone who displayed a possibility of turning was spirited away and chained up in specially constructed dwellings carved from the marble seam itself. The decision, it transpired, may have been prudent, as the changed workers became aggressive and seemed to develop a unique ability. Whereas the male victims had been effectively turned to stone, those transformed were able to rapidly inflict the same condition on others by merely looking at them. Even with this epidemic rapidly spreading and the workforce dwindling, the mines remained open, the greed of the ruling class outweighing the importance of people's lives. But soon enough they were left without a choice, as the amount of these aberrations swelled to unmanageable numbers, and they inevitably broke free of their bondage, wreaking havoc across the mines and turning all they gazed upon to stone. Rather than attempt an evacuation, the ruling class decided it would be best to collapse the mines, leaving everything down there, including the majority of their workers, to their fates. Although torturous, death would be relatively swift for the workers, but for the transformed creatures, fate would be rather crueler. Their condition had not only caused them horrifying mutations, but also unnaturally long life. For thousands of years they would reside, trapped in the darkness, alone. The few surviving miners that had made it back to the surface took with them tales of snake-haired monsters and their friends turning to stone before their eyes. While the stories were not widely believed, a result of yet more societal censorship, they did endure, becoming myths and legends that told of the great and terrifying Medusas. It would not be until the subterranean survivors of Terraria's corruption explored the underground world that the Medusas would be unleashed. They had no idea how long had passed, or what had happened to the surface world. All they cared for was vengeance, against the ones who had caused their transformation, the ones who had left them to die, the ones who no longer existed. It would not matter that the lizards had fallen though, for so great was their thirst for revenge that they would lay waste to any and all they encountered. A handful of Medusas was a force to be reckoned with for sure, but not enough to bring Terraria to its knees. They would need a fighting force, and these lost explorers who had stumbled upon them would be the perfect start. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did and want to support the channel, then please consider subscribing and hit that bell so that YouTube might possibly inform you when a new video comes out. If you want to go that bit further, please feel free to support the channel on Patreon or go and buy some merchandise on Spreadshirt and Teespring. Links are all down in the description. Other than that, have a great day and I'll see you next time.